As you know, I've been missing in action for a good part of the year. And I've had two separate unrelated bouts with cancer. So this is my first time back. I'm still dealing with my voice because I had throat and tongue cancer as well as multiple myeloma. So please excuse my voice. Hope everybody can hear me and understand. Let me just say that I know other people in the room have had health challenges, and when you have cancer, you find out half the room has had cancer or some kind of illness, and it's been a real challenge. They had to cut my vocal cord because there was cancer in that nerve, so I'm hoping to work with that and work with the melanoma. But I'm cancer-free now, and thank goodness we're in Atlanta and we have Emory Hospital. I mean, it was the place to be. Didn't need to go anywhere else. Also, just to say that no one would wish to have a major illness, particularly one where you don't know whether you're going to make it or not. But there's also a lot of gifts that come. And one of those gifts is learning to be a grateful receiver. So I know there's a lot of people here today. I know this congregation, which is my congregation, have been offering up prayers and sending healing energy my way. And I really believe that's a big part of why I'm here today. So I want to thank all of you for that support. And if you know anybody else that's going through this, don't feel like you're going to do something wrong or say the wrong thing. Just be there. Be there for them. So let me see if there's any other announcements for the good of the group. Just raise your hand. I don't know who our runner is today. George is. Okay. Thank you, Natalie. And I would encourage everyone to track House ATL. That's where the action is, where a lot of the work is going on. Any other announcements, things? Bruce, hold on.
I bet almost everybody knows Habitat for Humanity is celebrating their 40th annual Jimmy Carter Work Project. It's going to be in the Sylvan Hills neighborhood. It's a mixed use. It's going to be about 73 units total, and 24 will be built in 1 week, first week in May. All I'm saying is keep an eye out for it. It's going to be a glorious moment to celebrate the Carter's legacy and Habitat for Humanity, which is also celebrating its 50th year. And I got involved in year 9. So it'll be a wonderful moment. Thank you.
Anybody else? Okay, let me introduce what we're going to do today and really what we're going to do this year. We've decided to spend the year, each of our 4 forums, really looking at the barriers to creating affordable housing. Now, we all know what many of those are. Certainly capital and the lack of capital, land costs, zoning restrictions, density limits, permitting delays, regulatory complexity. We could spend a long time on that. Impact fees, construction costs, insurance premiums, interest rates, infrastructure constraints, community opposition, the NIMBY effect, political risk, subsidy limits, fragmented funding, investor competition, market volatility. And then every once in a while we decide to start wars. So we're in the middle of unknown at a national and international level what our economy is going to be. So we're going to do our best. We can't cover them all, and we really can't go into too much depth. But we're going to address each of those this year, and we're going to start today. We're going to start what I would call just kind of level setting, just what is the environment that we're in. We're going to look back just a little bit over the last year or so because I would say we have a lot to celebrate. We've created a lot of housing. ARC has stepped up, so there's housing task force around the region. It's the number one issue around the region. As policymakers ask citizens what their biggest issue is, it's affordable housing. So finally, it's our time. Finally, it's time to talk about the barriers and try to overcome some of these things. So I can't think of a better way to start this is to ask our friend Sarah Kirsch. Sarah, if you'll come up, we're going to have what we call a fireside chat. Now this chat's going to be, Sarah's going to be doing all the talking here. But as I looked around the region, I thought who could help us really kind of level set, say where we are, what our challenges are, and what we might look to in the future. We know Sarah, I think everybody in the room knows Sarah. Olaleye is a director for a long time. The Community Foundation, recent years. House ATL works out of the Community Foundation. So Sarah, thank you. And I'll sit down and just...
Am I on? Yeah. Good morning.
So go girl, where are we?
I told Bill, for those who know me, I won't have a problem just talking. So great to be with you all. Great to be back with everyone here at the Housing Forum, and particularly to be with you, Bill. Just lots to celebrate. So including that it's been a really remarkable run in affordable housing production recently. And I know it's easy for us to lament all the challenges, but we should also start with a lot has been going right. There was an article, many of you probably saw it, Atlanta ranked 5th in the nation for affordable housing apartment production from 2020 to 2024. That's pretty remarkable. That would not have been the case. And for those of you who are close to it, 2024, we were just getting going, right? Like deliveries are going to continue when you get the data for 25, 26, 27. That does not mean we should take our foot off the gas because we have to be planning now for 27 and 28 and so forth. But it really is a sort of remarkable moment in time, and happy to sort of share why I think that is. But obviously we've put together a lot of capital to produce affordable housing. And I think capital, though, is a lagging indicator. That is the result of a lot of other things, right? Natalie's here and Bill mentioned House ATL. And I do look back to that work in 2017, 2018 to come together with shared priorities, a shared work plan, and a common understanding that we can agree on probably 80% of what needs to happen. And if we spend all of our time, it was William McFarland who said it at our first meeting, if we spend all of our time arguing about the 20%, we're never going to do anything, and we don't have the luxury of that. So let's focus on the 80% that we agree on and move forward. And part of that was articulating a goal. Sounds really silly, right? Like we need a goal, right? But that 20,000 unit production goal has been so clarifying for keeping everyone moving in the same direction. It resulted in the Community Foundation saying, we'll take 5,000. We're going to put that in our strategic plan. Under Terry Lee's leadership, it resulted in Atlanta Housing saying, give us half. We're going to take 10. That's a big deal, right? And as of right now, both of those goals are ahead of schedule. We've already passed 5,000 with Community Foundation supporting. Community Foundation builds no housing, designs no housing. We're just those last dollars in to make it happen. So, we're just supporting the ecosystem. Atlanta Housing is ahead,
But huge.
but a huge piece
Yeah,
of it.
because we haven't
Yeah, we
had
haven't,
that from Community Foundation.
we haven't had that flexible
Yeah.
capital, which I really think is essential. And Atlanta Housing is pacing ahead of target of where it should be relative to its 10,000 unit goal. So that's really remarkable. And so, that coalition building, things that happen in this room, things that happen in those House ATL work groups, those are so important because it signifies to everyone else that it's okay to move. And I think that's really important in terms of the political leadership. Having the Atlanta Regional Commission adopted as a strategic priority for the region, having the mayor articulate it, Dickens says it's his love language, right? And having him adopt that 20,000 unit goal, I cannot tell you how important that is to aggregating capital and bringing partners together to know that they are aligned to the mayor's vision. That same goes across the region, whether that's Chairwoman Hendrickson in Gwinnett or whether it's great leadership we're seeing out of DeKalb. There's a lot of really important political leadership that creates the conditions for that capital to come together.
Keep going, Sarah. Where are we going?
So, I think that we've been in this almost frenetic pace of working really hard because everyone cares so deeply. Frenetic is not always sustainable. So I think we are in a moment of time where we can really evaluate what's working, dig deep on, I sort of use the analogy of what tools we need doing what, right? And how we make sure that we're not asking a hammer to be a screwdriver, right? And that we're really aligned in how we're moving that forward. And I think looking at how things have come together, whether it's in the city of Atlanta or what's happening across the region, and making sure that we're all sort of in the right seat on the bus, to keep using analogies, but that we're using the right capital sources, that we're using the right policy sources to produce affordable housing at the deepest levels and for the longest terms that we can. So I think that is really important. I think we also are at a point where I think every single person in this room believes what I believe in my core, that housing is foundational to all the other things we care about in our community. I mean, we know this to be true. It's foundational to better educational outcomes. It's foundational to economic mobility. It's foundation to food security. It's foundational to better health outcomes, right? We all know that to be true.
And where do we put our transit?
And where we put our transit, the combined cost of housing and transportation is among the worst in the nation here in Atlanta. So truly foundational. I think in order to continue the momentum that we have had, we have to tell that story better, make it better known to the sort of constituent parties at large. And I think we got to measure it. We can know it, but I think we have an opportunity with all of the housing that we're bringing online to really quantify that impact in a way that allows us to talk about housing the way we talk about infrastructure, right? We can't think that we are just going to stop funding roads and bridges and transit, right? No one believes in a future where you're just not funding it. And we can all experience that in our lives. We need to have the sort of framework that allows us to talk about housing in that way. When we started the House ATL work, we made recommendations around housing opportunity bond, philanthropic capital, social impact capital. Those were intended to be, in part, a bridge to dedicated funding sources, recurring, renewable, reliable, No business is going to plan against unknown funding sources, right? Like you're crazy to be like, I'm going to scale, I'm going to hire people. And when I don't know what next year looks like in terms of funding sources. And so
Well, let's dig into that a little bit.
Sure.
Sarah. It's setting at the Community Foundation. I know, having been on the Blank Foundation board, we have, not historically, but in recent years, made major investments, particularly on the West Side Future Fund.
Sure.
We've seen foundations like Woodruff step up. They never have before. So we know a lot of the federal funding is being cut for now, maybe not forever. What do you see? Is this, to your point, are foundations, corporate investors willing to invest now where they haven't been in the future?
I think that's been the really positive part of the last 3 years, right? We've seen financial institutions, we've seen philanthropy, we've seen a little bit of the corporate sector, but I think there's really an opportunity for them to come to the table in a more meaningful way to help fund it. I think, anyone see the mayor and the governor and Katie Kirkpatrick, ringing the bell at the stock exchange, celebrating 100 days till the World Cup. That was like a fun thing to see Atlanta on the national stage like that. And in the interview after, Governor Kemp was asked about, being the best state for business for the 12th year running, which is great, right? That's great. We love being, number one state for business. And I watched that and went, being pro housing is being pro business, right? And we have some great affordable housing funding at the state level. We've got to protect that state low income housing tax credit that has helped us achieve that number that we talked about at the beginning. But, anyone who's in economic development will tell you that one of the first questions a business has is, where are my people going to live, right? And I need a diversity of housing from the full spectrum. The mayor talks about it, we need housing for the principal and we need housing for the sanitation workers, right? Like when you talk about a school. So having that full spectrum. So I think us talking about housing in that way, like it's infrastructure, that it's part of being a pro-business state, that we need it as part of our full ecosystem, that it's part of being competitive. And then being able to show that the things that we believe are true are going to help bring more foundations to the table.
We have the tools.
We have the
I
tools.
mean, we have a state
Yeah,
trust fund for housing.
we do.
We've never really funded it.
That's being funded, additionally with the 50 million for homelessness. We have really powerful low-income housing tax credit that we need to protect. Because when markets are wonky like they've been right now, those tax credits are the name of the game to produce more housing. When we started this work, we said, or when I started this particular part of the work, and we were losing 1,500 affordable units in the city of Atlanta every year. And we said, all right, number one, we got to stop the bleeding, right? We got a leaky bucket and we got to plug it. So we got to preserve what we've got, and we need to keep producing. And when costs are high and economics are tricky, being able to have that pipeline through the tax credits and through the trust funds is really important.
Well, we've always depended on just extraordinary effort. Now we actually have some structures in place. Speak a little bit about that. What do you see in the future as far as structurally how we could make progress?
I think, this idea that we could do this thing called social impact investing for affordable housing was an idea in 2018, launched the first fund in 2020, which was the Atlanta Affordable Housing Fund. David Allman and Mark Pollack launched it as this proof of concept. We're in year 6 of that. And it is so great when our investors, the foundations, the individuals, the corporate go, it's really working.
It's proof.
Right? It's this thing that you kind of sold us on, it's really working. It's really working. It's producing housing. Some of our partners are in the room filling those gaps. And that led to the Go ATL Fund, which right now is around $50 million, basically fully committed. We're only in year 2 of that, so we don't have as much of a track record. But that type of, we can't say that was a one-time deal. right? That isn't, it can't be that that was like, oh, we tried that, that was cool, on to the next. That needs to become a recurring source of capital for production of housing. So I think that is one. I think, this alignment issue is another. And then I think it has to be bigger than the city of Atlanta.
Say a little bit more about alignment.
So there's the political alignment, there's the alignment by funding sources, and there's a willingness of folks to come together to say, we agree on a path forward. I think what's been so unique about the last 6 to 7 years has been that kind of unusual suspects have been willing to work together.
Right.
And there's real power in that. But that requires a lot of trust. And so, things like this, things like House ATL, things like statewide tables on housing, I think are really important to continuing that ecosystem of keeping people, not assuming that everyone's sort of working at odds, but that there's a shared purpose and that shared goal, right? Whether it's 20,000 in the city or 100,000 at the regional level, or depending on who you ask, we have a shortage statewide of 500,000 to a couple million housing units, and so we need that alignment to chase those shared goals.
I've got 10 more questions, but for the good of the audience, does anybody have any questions for Sarah? Or I'll keep going. Any questions? Golly, Sarah.
All done.
You do?
Yeah.
Got one over here, George.
There we go. We're on. I don't usually get to ask questions. Hi, I'm George.
Hey, George.
So I was running and may have missed part of this, but how do we recapitalize? Much of what we've been able to do, ANDP just finished a 2,000 unit campaign, raised $18 million, plus hundreds of millions of other federal new market tax credit, capital magnet fund. What Community Foundation has done is nothing less than remarkable. How do you recapitalize? How long can people stay in the game on this?
So it's public, it's private, it's philanthropic, right? It's all at the table. A lot of cities do operate under continuing housing opportunity bonds. I was on the phone with San Francisco. That's their game. Every 5 years, 7 years, another major housing opportunity bond. But there's uncertainty of that politically. And so I think, this big, hairy, audacious goal of having a dedicated funding source, I think has to be the work at the local level. There have been all sorts of ideas about how you could do that. And I think that's some work that's worth dusting off, because housing opportunity bonds are great, but is not always reliable. So that's on the public side. The state level funding we've talked about, you've got to have that as recurring and renewable, protecting the state housing tax credits. And then on the philanthropic side, I'll just go back to, I think it is this, I was going to point to Joel, because Joel and I were on a panel a while ago, and I gave my line, which is, I believe that housing pays dividends to everything else. It's a multiplier effect for all of the other things. And Joel jumped in, and it's always great when someone delivers your message better than you do. And he was like, no. It's not just paying dividends. It's all the things you're saving on all of the other community needs, right? We know when a kid moves more than once a year, their educational outcomes go down. There was a study that Atlanta Housing did years ago. I'd love to see more like this, where kids with housing choice vouchers outperformed their counterparts in school because of housing stability, right? Which for some people that feels counterintuitive, right? That a family who would, be saying, hey, I need some help to meet my housing goals. That we need more of that, because that's what resonates with philanthropy, is that it's not just about sticks, bricks, land, and units, right? It's not just your AMI levels. It is about these measurable outcomes that you are not just helping other community goals, you are actually saving on all of the other things. It's what one of our philanthropic partners said to me. He said, you know, Sarah, through all this work, I've started thinking about housing as a keystone species, which if anyone has kids who've studied like the bee or the beaver, and like, you know, that they go away and the whole ecology falls apart, right? That housing is like that keystone species. And if we lose attainable housing for our, you know, members of our community, it all just sort of unravels. So I think that is the case. And then I think the private sector, we've demonstrated that private capital, you know, housing is unique in that there is underlying value, there is an income stream. You can invest in housing and make bond-like returns. And I think continuing to scale that is really important. All of that said, I do think, you know, taking this moment where a lot of those funding sources have been committed to say, how are we doing this in the most efficient way, is a good strategic use of time.
You just answered the question I was going to ask, so I'll let that one go. But, you know, we have journalists in the room, and we're writing more and more about this. And I guess one of our challenges, any of us who get interviewed or have an opportunity to contribute, is when they're writing on education or income mobility, they also need to be writing about housing. If they're writing about transportation and why didn't MARTA or transportation choices do better, we need to be talking about housing. So we've got to make the connection every time we get the opportunity. Yep. I know you do that, Joel, I know you do that. That's why I challenge us all, anytime we're talking about the related issues, which we care just as much about, that we say everything's connected, everything else. Georgia said there was a question. Now we're starting to run out of time, and then 5 questions come up. So I'm going to get a few in. Yes.
Good morning. My name is Nadia, and I live in the city of Atlanta. I am new to this conversation, and I really appreciate what the city is doing. My question is, how much of the need does that represent, the 20,000 in housing that we're working on right now? And how far do we have to go to meet our goals?
It's a great question. So I spent early in my career as an analyst, so I have like these numbers that float around in my head. You know, the city's only 10% of our regional, or less than 10% of our regional population, right? So we are kidding ourselves if we think we're going to solve our affordable housing challenges by solving them in the city. So that's a, you know, really important point. We did a study when I was with the Urban Land Institute, and we identified a goal at that point of 10,000 units a year at the regional level, which would have been preserving 5,000 of those and building 5,000, both rental and home ownership. So that gives you a sense of scale. A lot of people will say, you know, hey, where did that 20,000 unit goal even come from? And is it sufficient? And the short answer is no, right? It is not sufficient. It was intended to be a goal that was actually achievable, a reach goal that required some extraordinary effort, big goal, but not a moonshot, right? And so yes, we need to, you know, hit that goal and keep moving at the city. And I think the lessons that have been learned, the policies like the private enterprise agreements that AUD is doing, that other counties also do, that really help with housing stability, or funding sources that have been successful. That is really critical to expanding that throughout the region. The Community Foundation funds do focus on the 5 core counties of Atlanta, which is where 80% of our jobs are. So that's been kind of our proxy for why we focus there. But still, the majority of our investment has been in City of Atlanta because it's where you have other funding sources that you're aligned with, and it's where there's been political will to move things forward.
There's a question in the back. Speaking
Maria
of great journalists.
Yeah, Maria Supporta. This question is more in your role, Sarah, on the Atlanta Housing Authority. I'd love for you to talk about, from your perspective, what are some of the frustrations that you have about us not being able to accelerate some of these projects faster? Like I'm thinking the Atlanta Civic Center. I'm thinking all the developments around Capitol Homes, different projects where actually the Atlanta Housing Authority has property or is working with others that have property. Why aren't we seeing more action?
So some of those had very protracted starts. So when I joined the Housing Authority Board almost 4 years ago, our first meeting was on Civic Center. You know, it's sort of like thrown in the deep end of like, oh, okay, well, we're approving Civic Center, let's go. I think there are process things that led to things taking longer that Atlanta Housing has done extraordinary work to address, to move things more quickly. There are also funding challenges. So some of you know that we brought a large national panel together to address the fact that although Atlanta Housing has enormous public land that can be produced and put into action for housing, we have lacked a funding source that is eligible for horizontal development costs. So in order to get sites ready for development, historically, tax allocation districts would be used for those funding needs, but that was a gap in getting these dormant sites ready for development. And so there have been partnerships with the city that you've seen, you know, in Bowen, for instance, to address that. You saw groundbreaking on Civic Center late last year, but you do have a lot of sort of unfunded costs that you have to get creative. We brought a bunch of national experts together to say, how do we figure out this gap? And so I think those were longer in the making, but that you'll see a lot more progress going forward. I'm always, as a board member, I'm always a little hesitant to speak to operational issues and those that aren't governance. But it has been a shared source of frustration and one that I think you're seeing the team address, and you'll see those numbers continue to accelerate.
I'm going to try to get, Joel, you're going to get some time in a few minutes, so I'm not going to, you're going to have to work it in. Doug, do you have a question?
Thank you. But mainly because I will always defer to this gentleman.
I'm not worried about you getting your legs in.
Joel's too
Joel.
nice. Very quickly, Sarah, you made reference to the fact that a lot of the things we're talking about are City of Atlanta centric. Do you have any sense at all of what's happening or what's moving in our suburban neighbor communities?
I do think there are a lot of bright spots. I mentioned Gwinnett where Chairwoman Hendrickson has, you know, helped support a comprehensive housing strategy, and you know, you have dedicated staff in a housing department in Gwinnett, which has allowed folks like Layla at Gwinnett Housing to move forward more quickly on projects. So in Gwinnett is obviously our biggest, is it our biggest county? Second behind DeKalb? Okay, thank you. So that's been a real bright spot. You know, with Alan Ferguson's leadership in DeKalb, I think we're seeing a lot of positive things happening there, but it's not universal, right? And I think you would know it as well as anyone that there are some places that having conversations about affordable and attainable housing still are met with a lot of community resistance. And that's where I get back to this, you know, narrative around its infrastructure. I think it's really important.
I think there's one more question, then we'll move on.
Thank you, Bill. Welcome back.
Thank you.
Adelaide Steedley with Atlanta Housing. Sarah, you've been in this with Natalie and a whole bunch of other, and Terry and a bunch of leaders over the last 6 or 7 years. And the alignment is so important. What was the biggest surprise moment when an organization or an entity just lined up in a way that you didn't, and you're like, wow, this thing's really happening? Was there a moment when something unexpected like that occurred? And how do we make more of those happen? Thank you.
I'm not sure if they would appreciate me saying this, but I'll say it anyway, is, you know, the manner in which the Woodruff Foundation has stepped up knocked my socks off. I was hoping for a fraction of what they committed to. And for those of you who weren't following it 3 years ago, they committed $100 million to affordable housing production and preservation. And like, I literally burst into tears, right? I mean, I was out of the country. I got the note. I was traveling with my oldest kiddo. And, I was absolutely floored. And, that is a credit to the leadership there. It's a credit to the trustees there. But it is really a credit to their willingness to line up to a shared vision that was initiated through House ATL and line up with who I think is our extraordinary mayor. I mean, I really think that's the lesson there. I spend a strange amount of time talking with cities across the country who either want to know how we've created these impact funds or want to know the origin story of House ATL. And I think maybe I'll close with this. I think that's a really exciting and thing that we should all be really proud of is when the LA Times calls and says, how do you feel about the mayor of Los Angeles copying your model? When Dallas says we're doing it, Dallas just announced a $50 million.
They fly in to see what.
They fly in to see it. They fly in to spend time with the city. They fly in to spend time with the partners. Dallas Community Foundation just committed $50 million of their own resources and are raising another 50. So this is really amazing work that people are looking to Atlanta and saying, this alignment issue of the public-private, nonprofit, and philanthropic is really something special. There you go.
I can't. Please, thanks, Sarah. Let me just say, Sarah's getting ready to take a little sabbatical. She's leaving the job she has. She doesn't know what's next. That's always exciting. But we know that Sarah's been one of the great community assets in this city, in this region, in this state. So we're anxiously waiting to see what's next.
I'm not going
to enjoy
anywhere,
your
so,
time.
yeah.
Thank you. George gave me an announcement for those people that are listening in on Zoom or YouTube. There's a Q&A section that you need to hit to ask your question so that we can get them in. Also, let me just forgive me. I wanted to start with this. When I was out, and George says, well, gosh, who's going to do the housing forum? I knew there was only one person that I would look to do that, and that was Doug Hooker. So, Doug, stand up, stand up. I actually told Doug I thought I was out of a job after he knows more about housing. I'd also point out Doug was the CEO of Atlanta Regional Commission for a number of years. Retired from that and has gone on to other things. But that is the foundation that he built and that Anna Roach has carried on to make this a regional and statewide issue. And that had to happen. To Sarah's point, we're not going to build it our way out here in Atlanta. It's got to be across the region. So let's move into our next panel. You guys want to come up and I'll get you introduced. We've got a developer focused on community-centered housing solutions. We got an expert on regulatory environment shaping development, and we've got a practitioner that's working with both faith-based and community groups on the ground. So, Joel, I know you're going to get me back for not getting that question in, but Joel Dixon is the founder and the CEO of Urban Oasis Development. Man about town that's doing much more than that. He's been here several times before. Always appreciate when you come back, Joel. We have E.J. Lee from Good Places. I don't know if people are familiar with Good Places, EJ will talk about it a little bit, but they're on the ground working here in Atlanta and Auburn Avenue and Edgewood, and working with increasingly with faith-based organizations that have land, which is always one of our big needs. But what do? Don't know anything about how to develop it. And we have a good friend here, hadn't been here before, Rick Porter from Richport Properties. Rick was a developer for many, many years. I think any of us who go back and talk about who was around the table, back in the 90s, even the 80s, Rick was there. Been very involved with A&DP. He's a professor at Georgia Tech now. He wanted me to be sure to say whatever he says today is what Rick thinks, not representing the whole university. Okay, thank you all for being here. Maybe we'll start with you, Rick, if you're ready. See if your mic's working. You've suggested that a bigger barrier isn't always zoning. Now, it always comes back to zoning, but we could have good zoning and have huge barriers. And any developer could tell us about that. So could you tell us some about development regulations and administrative processes that are layered on top of every job that almost makes it impossible, particularly for small developers, to build any housing?
Sure. How many days do we have? Good to be with you this morning. I'm going to start with a term called accretion. And I'll remind you that New Orleans is built on silt. And over the years, that silt has floated down the Mississippi River, and much of it turned into good land. Much of it turned into good land, and they've built on it. Some of it's still not any good, and they have put it aside. We've got a regulatory system that's very similar to that. Good ideas aren't free. There's a lot of good ideas over the last half of a century, 50 years, that have come along and worked their way into our regulatory system below just land use. Because once we come to some decision that we're going to use land a certain way, that's got to be administered. And what we're not talking about enough is how our regulatory infrastructure has accreted. We have built on it, and we have built on it, and we have built on it. But we have not decided that some of those ideas from 40 years ago are not necessarily relevant today. But we don't know which ones those are. And we have gotten afraid. Sarah mentioned trust. We don't trust each other enough to take away from that regulatory accretion in such a way that we can get permission to do almost anything these days. So that differentiation of how do we administer our policies and goals in such a way that there is efficiency. This housing issue we're in didn't start 5 years ago. It didn't start 10 years ago. It started many years ago, and we are now across the Rubicon. We have got to do something fundamental. We're building on this Euclidean zoning platform that is 100 years old this year, 1926, still the fundamental platform. We've got to go beyond that.
Well, what are just some of the practical things? Any low-hanging fruit here?
There's some low-hanging fruit, and I'm going to reference, I've had the pleasure over many years of developing thousands of building lots and homes. But over the last few years, Karen Ramsey's in the room, I've had the opportunity to work with Gwinnett Housing Corporation on their desire to move into for sale affordable housing and find a way to do that. So I'm going to reference just a couple of things. First, we train at Georgia Tech. We have in this region some outstanding civil engineers that can produce designs for new communities in a very efficient and very competent way. We have got to give those folks the ability to do that. It doesn't take 6 months of review of plans to know that we have a good set of civil engineering plans that a good contractor can build. If a civil engineer is licensed in the state of Georgia, you can put guardrails around it if you want. They should be able to submit a set of land development plans that is approved in 2 or 3 weeks, and the contractor can go to work. There's no reason that that can't happen. One, low-hanging fruit. Two, we have got to look from the standpoint of housing. We just finished up one community with Gwinnett Housing. Below zoning, didn't even try to zone it. I'm going to mention 3 things. Some of them are emotional, and I will get that. Required 2-car garages on every house. Required. No debate. Required. Every driveway 16 feet wide and 20 feet of distance behind the building line. Okay, now hold your breath a minute. 70 trees with a minimum 3-inch caliber datum breast height for 21 units. That's $70,000. I love trees. Every developer does, right? I love trees. $70,000. I can give you the numbers on concrete. 4 parking spaces per unit. 2 of them in the house, garage. 2 of them on a driveway. Those are things that pure policy. I mean, we don't have to go through a big analysis to understand that. Pure policy, pure policy. And I can add up $5,000 per unit with those 3 things. Try not to exaggerate. I can add those dollars up.
Actually, Rick told me he needed 4 hours to answer that question. So I asked for the low-hanging fruit. Plenty of examples. I see EJ over here nodding his head, everything Rick said. Tell us a little bit about your work. All right, be ready.
Here we go.
All right.
All right. I think I'm ready now. All right. So yes, EJ Lee, partner at Good Places. I'm actually Plan B, filling in for my business partner, Sherry Young, who is down in Savannah now at the Affordable Housing Conference. That being said, we at Good Places, we partner with churches, nonprofits, landowners, those that have a vision, those that want to see their underutilized assets be leveraged, activated for community revitalization. And I love the idea that, and yeah, it hits our heart to say housing is foundational, right? And it's essentially the cornerstone for how communities are built and how communities begin to flourish, thrive, all the stuff. I feel like I'm preaching to the choir because you wouldn't be here if you didn't all believe that to be true. So yes, so with Good Places, we help kind of reimagine what that might look like, partnering with local mission organizations.
I know you guys weren't personally involved, but you probably tracked what happened over in Kirkwood recently, where a congregation been there for 100 years, had land, wanted to build housing for the elderly, most in need, probably argued about it for 2 years, and the neighborhood voted them down. Did you run into that?
Yes. Well, maybe not quite to that extent.
Okay.
But yes, I mean, there are barriers. And at the end of the day, the NIMBY effect is a real thing. And, from where we sit, it really is about trust, right? It's trusting that developers who oftentimes have a very bad rap, actually have some good intentions, right? And that we aren't looking to just build, dump, and disappear, but that we are genuinely interested in communities flourishing to be a little bit better because we are there and giving more opportunities for people to be a part of that.
Excellent. Joel, you and I had a conversation in preparation for today. And one of the things we talked about, because I know you've worked in English Avenue and Adair Park and other places in the city, of housing that used to provide affordable housing historically. Duplexes, triplexes, those kind of places that are now getting zoned out, almost impossible to build. Speak about your experience.
Thank you, Bill. I appreciate the opportunity. And yes, I will recover that time. Good morning, everyone. Joel Dixon, Urban Oasis Development. As I answer this question, I just want you all to have context. One, I was raised here in Atlanta. I grew up in public housing, John Hope University Homes, which is the oldest public housing project for Black people. Was very much not about housing. My background was in technology. That's what my first career was. Did a lot of startup things, came back to Atlanta from Silicon Valley specifically to be a part of the tech ecosystem, got pulled into housing. And so in answer to that question, why did I get pulled into housing? Because as Sarah mentioned, Atlanta, Georgia has been great for business. I came here for technology because I knew it could be great in the technology sector, which it has become. That very success, though, however, unravels a number of repercussions. And those repercussions are what we're now looking at today, which is we are a product of our own success. And when we talk about housing and the lack of attainable housing and access to housing at whatever variety of price points, it is because in many ways we have been successful, right? I grew up in Atlanta in a dysfunctional English Avenue, Vine City, West Side, where nobody wanted to touch it. As it was mentioned, Kirkwood, even with where I grew up, we were all so ecstatic we did not live in Kirkwood and East Lake Meadows. Literally, seriously. I was riding my sister around yesterday, who also grew up here, lives in LA now. She was like, people live in East Lake? Kirkwood? Is this safe? So mind you,
Can't afford to live there now.
so mind you, this is that same Atlanta though. So then fast forward, right? 2010, myself and my now business partner decided to invest. He had already been building in Eastlake and Kirkwood in 2004, 2005, 2006, in the years when you could afford housing for $200,000, $100,000, $300,000. Yes. Recession happens, great downturn, 08, 09, 2010. Fast forward 2010, we bought first properties for $30,000 and less with houses on them in Kirkwood. Dysfunctional still, even with the Eastlake Golf Course doing the thing, nobody was really moving into Kirkwood. But there was this great educational system there, Jew Charter School, which stood out as a beacon, and that began to bring people there because they could have free education. In order to do that, however, there needed to be housing. And so we were a part of building housing there, just reactivating old houses, tearing some down, rebuilding them. Between 2010 and 2015, we built a lot of housing, but we literally watched that neighborhood go from a $230,000 neighborhood to $1 million neighborhood for over 5 years. And so I want you all to have that context, because as I give answers to these questions, it's very important to know where things come from. And also that I have gentrified. Like, I've seen it, I have done it, I've been a part of it. I want everybody to know my hands have that same blood on them. But that's the reason why we learned what not to do and started doing what needed to be done. So when we talk about a variety of housing types, one of the things related to Kirkwood is that there was single family only zoning there, and that's all we were building. Well, that was very easy to do when you have land that costs $30,000, right? So then we could just upgrade that house, do it, whatever. Also, this is circa, 2010 housing and construction costs. Well, you could do that and still sell something for $200,000, $300,000. Make a profit. We're for profit, by the way. We're a missional for profit, but we are for profit. And there's housing now for somebody who now can send their kids to a great performing school. But as a result of that, more and more people wanted more and more housing, but all we had was like single family houses, right? So only one house can help one household. And that's what we were doing. But because of that pressure of demand, right, then the prices could keep going up, which meant if 10 people will outbid for 300,000 and then another 10 will outbid for 400,000, this is just economic pressures. And so we learned there that one, we could build housing, build great housing and bring people into now what would become a flourishing neighborhoods. But now we were then going to be pushing out either others who were already there or not making it available for others to come in. And so from that, the only resolution was a couple of things. One, you have to increase the number of housing options that somebody can come into. And you can do that with very basic math. It's actually not complex. It is division principles or multiplication principles. That is, you can take one plot of land and multiply how much you can build on that. And so in the city of Atlanta, it's not just the fact that we have single family only zoning, and I believe in single family ownership, by the way, this is not against that. But because we limit it to only that, you now restrict the diversity of housing, which restricts the number of units that you can now put on that land that could multiply the number of people that could be helped. We complicate that also by creating what's called minimum lot or land sizes on which you can build something. So as was just discussed by Rick, something that everybody laughed at, you know, oh, you're forcing a house to have two garages and making all this and just logically, rationally, that kind of sounds off. Well, understand, we have a bigger problem that starts even before that, which is even on the land, we say, okay, this house has to be on 20,000 square feet of land area. This house has to be on 50,000 square feet of land area. We have zoning in this city where you have 3-4 football fields, minimum lot size. For what size house, everybody? What size house do you need to live in when at this point we have, even if you're talking about a big house, okay, maybe you got a big house, 2,400 square feet, great, awesome. Do you need 3 times that in land area? 4 times that in land area? And so the overlap of this conversation when it comes to when we talk about duplex and triplexes and what is now considered missing middle housing is that all of that stuff is illegal today. And that's a big problem because if you want to create affordable, attainable housing for everybody, which does not mean any particular price point, it's just for everybody. Everybody in here, if we took a survey, would have different incomes, would have different needs. Great. The only way to solve that then is to create a diversity of options to fit your budget, to fit your need.
What prevents us from doing that?
Well, what prevents us is, and just to give you one example that's more reasonable, we don't have an affordable vehicle crisis in this country. Nobody is getting subsidies to buy cars. Even if cars go up, down, whatever, the reason is that, Bill, you might have a station wagon. I might have an SUV, which I do have now with a 3-year-old son. Somebody else might have a two-door car. Somebody else might have a motorcycle. Once again, your price point and available what you need size-wise is accessible and legal. And so in order to have that same type of abundance and attainability for you and you have got to make it legal to create that type of diversity of housing as it relates to.
Well, Rick said he could take care of that. Is that what you told me, Rick?
Absolutely, I can take care of it.
Get your mic. Let me add a question to this, and I'm gonna come back to Joel. You're over Georgia Tech. What's capturing these young graduate students? What's capturing their imagination? I mean, that's the people, just like Joel, that may have studied one thing, but then get a call to say, I want to make a difference.
It's there's 2 things that I will mention. Our program is built around, within the College of Design, around a collaborative classroom. Planners, designers, construction folks, and developers that we do our best to bring together in the classroom. It is, after 3 generations of housing development, it is first important that housing is on their mind, because a lot of, over the years, a lot of people coming to Georgia Tech, housing was not at the top of the list. It's at the top of the list. They absolutely don't understand this question. They don't understand the prescriptive nature of the land use system. And so that's part of the seed that we try to plant. It doesn't have to be that way, number one. Number two, it is that way. I don't want them to leave and hit the brick wall and turn to another industry, because this is very important, that there is not patience today with young people for this Byzantine regulatory system that we work in. They are not going to wait 3 years to get a permit to build a house or to do a development. So we're trying to bridge that, Bill, and that's what a lot of you are doing, and that's why it's important. How do we bridge their desire for innovation? Young people come to Georgia Tech to change the world. And we've got to open the door and let them do that from an entrepreneurial standpoint and from a permission standpoint. And we've got to, and that's what they're asking for. And we spend a lot of time talking about it. How do we put 10 houses or places to live? How do we combine those things? This idea of combining duplexes and triplexes and fourplexes. Twice in my career over about 40 years, I got to do that, just by getting special permission. Think about if it was always permitted. How much would we have out there? And they don't understand why that can't happen. And we're trying to, on the one hand, gently explain it can't happen today. On the other hand, how can it happen? That's what.
Let me ask, how is a place like Georgia Tech or Georgia State a resource, say, to the conversation that ARC is having? Or that the city would come to Tech and say, help us in creating, the city we want to raise our kids in?
Number one, it's beyond planning and it goes to engineering. And that's one of the goals that we're working with from a collaboration standpoint, because planners can dream and I'm all in. I'm a dreamer myself. But then at the end of the day, it's got to be implemented. And that's part of what, again, Georgia Tech is doing, not as collaboratively in this arena as we need to do. And we just announced a joint center for real estate at Georgia Tech.
Okay.
And that's that hub that's going to bring this together, because that's really the key. Is we can't, zoning in some ways is dreaming. Development regulations is implementing. That's what we have to merge.
So we've got to execute.
We have got to be able to execute innovatively and efficiently. And that's the piece that we're missing.
So I see EJ over here just nodding his head. This is my experience every day. But I'm wondering, you're an architect. Joel, you studied technology. Would you say this was, oh boy, I know how to get rich, I'm going to do affordable housing? Or was it more of a call of I want to serve? I mean, EJ, how'd you land at good places?
Wow. I'm still trying to figure that out, to be honest with you. Well,
That's good.
we just, it's like a lot of things, you just kind of fall into it or you back into it only to find, the connections and the signs were all there. I actually, in a former life, I actually was a minister. I did young adult ministry at the Korean Community Presbyterian Church for about better part of 10 years, graduated from Columbia Theological Seminary with MDiv. Yes. So I'm a recovering pastor who wanted to see more things happen in the community and realized that the church, as much as I love them, wasn't always the right vehicle to see genuine, sustainable community revitalization. And so I started to look at buildings, places, things that were already part of the infrastructure as assets in the community, and saying, hey, how about these underutilized assets to now be activated to become true community assets as they were perhaps once intended many, many years ago in the Byzantine times that you were referring to. So I think in some ways it took a little bit of wandering, but I find myself in this place to really see how can we start leveraging the things that we already have, aligning the policies, the regulations to then be able to have the outcomes that I believe that we truly would love to see, we all envision, and would love to see, and would like to be a part of that solution, right? And so this is how
Yeah,
actually I
appreciate
got
it.
started.
Joel, we've heard a little of your story, but there's a lot of challenges, a lot of frustrations. What keeps you in it, buddy?
Yeah, so I probably should also started with, I come from a long line of preachers and teachers. So if I'm not concise, blame it on the bloodline. But yeah, you know, also family that come out of Montgomery, Alabama, out of civil rights, out of community impact, community development. You know, was raised here in Atlanta under that same context. So yeah, leaving the tech industry, I did not leave the tech industry to make more money in real estate. Everybody who I grew up in the tech industry here, who was working with Georgia Tech and everything, Atlanta Ventures now own all of South Downtown.
They all got those
unicorns.
big houses, right?
Yes, exactly. But that being said, you know, significance is success for me. And, you know, I grew up in an Atlanta that I love. I still love it. As we were watching things unfold in 2015, 2016, I knew we were going to lose our city. I knew it was not going to be the place that everybody moved here to be. I also knew that Atlanta was not yet, you know, we always say Atlanta can become the city that everybody already thinks we are. And so that's significance for me, is like, can we bridge that gap? Can we reach that goal? And can we do it while also maintaining principles that I believe in, which is economic development, which is, you know, economic advancement, which is not seeing Eastlake and Kirkwood remain Eastlake and Kirkwood in 1980, but be Eastlake and Kirkwood today, just with everybody included. I think that you can, and so that's what drives me.
Well, here's the last question for each of you. The mayor calls you up, you know, he's watching now. He listens to you guys. He calls you up and say, what's the most meaningful thing I can do? You've set the goal, you know, he set some money aside, but he's asking you. And Rick, you can answer for Georgia Tech if you like. But what's the most meaningful thing I can do as mayor or as the head of ARC or as chairman of a county? What is it?
So
I know I'm not catching you short.
Yeah. So now my Mayor Dickens, you know, this is a book called The Atlanta City Design. Sarah mentioned House ATL. Both were kind of created around the same time and came out of great efforts. The most important thing our mayor can do, our city council can do, is just follow what has already been recommended. This is the business plan for the city of Atlanta. House ATL also, as was mentioned, has had tremendous success, but in there were zoning reforms that also need to be included if we're saying we're going to follow what we came up with. And then the third thing is that at a national level, our mayor sits as the chair, sat on the chair of the National Housing Task Force, because this is not just an Atlanta issue, this is a national issue. Because Atlanta does influence everything, he is the chair, right? Because we've been working on this issue a long time. They came out with a list of recommendations as well, Bill, in the fall. Just look at that list, just execute on that list. There are a lot of other issues Rick has mentioned as well, but that is what I would recommend to my mayor.
Do your job. Rick?
I would say take every planner that you have got reviewing plans to determine if the title block is the right size and that the ground cover in the intermediate erosion control plan is appropriately articulated on page 10. Take those planners and have them update the goals of the comprehensive plan on an annual basis. Write a zoning that can in fact deliver those goals so that 90% of the new development that comes to your county or city is development by right. And that the professional architects and engineers are producing plans that can be built, that will need minimal review, and we go to work. There are some smart people in this room, in this town, and in this region. And we have got to continue to trap those smart people, bring them out of technology, maybe even a pastor or two, and put them to work quickly and innovatively and efficiently, because we're not going to bring these young people to do it. But that archaic system of comp plans and zoning ordinance and development regs, and then we spend all our time and put all our bright minds down here at the development reg level, reviewing and reviewing and reviewing and reviewing small, minute details that I hate to tell them have, and they understand this, and that's the frustration they have. It has very little to do with what gets produced. All of these months of work really do not even affect what happens in the field or have minimal effect. Let's put them to work smartly and let them do this job so that most of what happens very quickly and very efficiently and very professionally, and get out of this archaic business that we're in.
Good answer. EJ, you go after Presbyterian ministers?
Yeah. Well, I would say, again, I mean, it's hard to follow up, because it's true. I mean, just do your job, right? Do what other people who have spent 40 plus years in the industry and really have seen, just hurdles, barriers, pandemic, I mean, name it. Like, we've been through it, and those people are advising on these are the ways that things need to be revised, updated. Just listen and lead and spearhead and ensure that the job gets done in a way that, I think for me, I think the biggest frustration when it comes to affordability is the time that it takes. When everyone agrees that affordability, what people can attain or afford, is the North Star, and we understand that's why we're all here, yet at the same time, we can't seem to bring alignment from, conception to construction, right? Like, I don't understand the time that it takes. And I think if someone can truly, really break down that time is money, right? And if things take longer, it costs more, which ultimately makes things less affordable. I think, to me, again, what's the hangup? What's the issue? Why can't we get that right? At least on the side that we can control, right? We can talk about wages, we can talk about a whole bunch of other factors, but the things that we can control, right, which we claim to be true, an outcome that we would like, why can we not control those things? And so I think we would have a very frank conversation.
Got him preaching now.
And Bill,
Yeah.
this is where I get to reclaim that loan of time that I gave
Well,
earlier.
I was just
I'll
gonna
keep it
give you a
very
minute.
brief. So I want everybody to understand, the question was about what would I tell my mayor? But I'm not as concerned about my mayor as I am concerned about you, my fellow citizens, my fellow residents. Our mayor works for you. I'm a citizen of this city. He works for me. So yes, I haven't asked for my mayor, but I haven't asked for you. Because going back to that Kirkwood conversation, while the underlying zoning of our city is at heart discriminatory and exclusionary, point blank period, the fact is that same Kirkwood that I sold houses in for $200,000, these same people, right, are now the ones who are preventing a church who owns their own land, who wants to do their own thing to help others that no longer look like or maybe have the same income as those same people who we brought in for $200,000. This is not my mayor. This is me. I'm like seriously, y'all, this is us. And so I want to make a call to every one of you. You have a voice, you have a representation, and you have a responsibility to learn about zoning, to make your requests known, to ask, not ask, to require that those who work for us, which is our mayor and our city council and the city planners and representatives, to do what should be done. This is not the mayor, this is us, our responsibility. And that is the reason why I'm here today taking a little extra time, because We have put too much on others and given our power that we own to others. And I told you, I came from preachers and teachers and civil
No,
rights leaders.
this is an altar call.
And they did
And,
not,
yeah.
they did not
I,
wait.
I think
for
this is when we
theirs
were
and
passed around the
and
offering
else
basket at this time.
determine what needed to be done. They stood up and they compelled others, in that case, through the right type of civil disobedience that's nonviolent. And I'm saying we have far less we need to do in this case, but the voice needs to be heard. I am here with you. There are many others who are here with you. If we do not address the zoning issue of this city, which has not changed in 40 years, my child will grow up in a very different Atlanta. We are the responsible
I gotta
ones.
jump in, Joel.
Thank you so much. Bill. I'm even hand you this mic, so I can't take it back.
All right, I want to honor there's a number of people listening in online. I'm try to get a couple of questions in. Megan Harris asked, this might be a good one for you, Joel or Rick. With the new HOA legislation passed, do you think we could open consideration for condo development for residents to retain equity, transfer wealth, and act on lower costs of entry for ownership? Now that's a balancing act, as we know, when we're putting public money in. You know, at the same time, if you live there and gain no equity, there's no gain for that family. Is there any model there that works?
It's a good idea, but the condo ownership model has got so many complications and hurdles in it that I don't believe that is where to insert in our conversation affordable housing.
Okay.
Because it's the same problem with HOAs that, when we burden an affordable community with an HOA, it is asking of these people one step too far. And I just think that the condo ownership model and the financial hurdles and various things, I do not believe that is a good place to attempt the affordable housing.
Well, we have to have a certain priority. Would you agree?
Yeah, so I mean, it's a big question that I will break down separately to say, if we're talking about condo cooperative ownership models, which is kind of what a condo is in many ways, it can be a part of the toolbox that can provide for affordable housing. Absolutely. We're doing right now 2 projects on the South Side Beltline next to Capitol View, Oakland City, Adair Park. Those are all 41 units, 100% affordable, and they are under a condo structure. The reason why it can be very helpful is that it allowed us to take a land area and once again, put the equivalent of 19 and 21 units of housing on what is about 1/4 of an acre. Very small. We got it in there. Because of the zoning, we had to condoize it, but now we have units that are under $200,000 next to the Beltline. So there is mechanisms, there are ways that it can be.
With equity.
Oh yeah, absolutely. These are
Okay.
all home buyers, fee simple, that will have equity in those properties.
Okay, let me get one more question in. I know there's a lot here. Karen Hatcher asked, how should we balance the urgent need for more housing with a neighborhood absorption? Now here, you know what we're talking about here is kind of that NIMBY of we don't want to be too dense, don't want the wrong kind of housing here. How do we plan that for neighborhoods at the same time build the housing we need?
The neighborhoods that we live in, that we love, were already playing that way, Bill. In 1929, I live in historic Adair Park, Southside Beltline area next to historic West End. These historic neighborhoods are now historic because they want to preserve what was there. Well, in order to preserve what was there in the case of Adair Park, which was built in the early 1900s, you have to preserve 2-family residential because at that time, that was the base level zoning. My actual street had 27 units of housing. The predominant house type was actually 2-family residential, then single family. It also had quads. And so what I will say is that it's not antithesis to have a mix of gentle density in our neighborhoods, because that's how the great neighborhoods we all love.
Well, we used
were
to call
created.
the good old days, huh?
That's the good old days.
Yeah. DJ?
Yeah, again, I like that answer. But to me, it's a ripple effect, right? Like, it's not the people that we're worried about. It's not, oh, there's too many people walking around. It's the cars, right? I think it really comes down to a transportation issue as well. Like, it's an ecosystem, and all this works together. So if we had better, again, I live over on the west side, and I would love to ride my bike places, but it is dangerous. I have a 4-year-old. I would love to take on my bike places, and I have to ride on a sidewalk, and I shouldn't have to ride on a sidewalk. And then people are yelling at me on the sidewalk, and I'm like, well, where would you like me to ride? And so I ride in the street, and then people are yelling at me for riding in the street, and they're like, hey. And all the while, I have a 4-year-old sitting in this little chair in the back, and I'm just, heightened. Again, all that to say, it's not just about the housing. It's not just about the number of people that live in a particular neighborhood. It's the number of cars, 4 of them per, right? And they're all driving around, and all of a sudden it just becomes, less desirable.
All right. We're about 15 minutes behind. This is very interesting. I saw a question back here. I'll get 1 or 2 in. You guys are going to have to hang with me. Yes.
Hi there, I'm Adam Graham, and I'm just here for me. I kind of wanted to spin the diamond on your affordable vehicle imagery about, since we can affect all price points. And I was just wondering, right, if we did, as we make changes to the regulation system, as you said, to open it up, that there might be more housing in all those different price points. But if we talk about vehicles, the majority of the car manufacturers, especially now that we've lost some EV regulations, and
There's a question.
there is. They predominantly make SUVs or one type because that's the most profitable. If we open those things, is there enough other pressure to build all those spectrums, or are we then stuck again, not because of regulation, but because of market forces, with one type of housing after all?
First, don't fight with the market, use the market. If we can do land use options within one community, SUVs can subsidize the EVs. Large market-driven houses can subsidize affordable housing with private development within one community. We have done a number of communities. We just finished one 4 or 5 years ago. Again, you got to get special permission, all this. We had units in the middle of the community that were selling for $220,000 and $30,000, surrounded by $450,000 units. I've done it 2 or 3 times, but you cannot do it easily. It is not encouraged. It's not encouraged in the financial structure. It's not encouraged in our zoning ordinances. It's not encouraged in our development regulations to do that. Every time I've done it, it's been special permission to do it. We can do it. Let the market forces help us subsidize affordable housing next door to each other, but we can't do it by going into communities and asking for a 3-2 vote from the community right now.
Right.
Innovate where you can. Don't force it. Innovate where you can, because once we get this stuff on the ground, all the boogeymans go away. All of this stuff that is just so awful, people ride around and say, wait a minute, is that a duplex? That can't be a duplex, because surely nobody would live in a duplex. We used to have a joke in one community I did that we put into the covenants that the folks living in the affordable housing had to once a year go steal a water hose just to keep the stereotype up. Well, people don't know the difference when you start them living together. And it's the same thing now, the EVs and the SUVs probably fight with each other, but they get along, right? So
once again, the reason why that won't be the case is that not just because of market, it is market, but it's more about people flow to where needs are and feel needs. There is a need for this other stuff. That is the reason why they will build it, because there's just a significant need. Yesterday's generation is not today's. The average household size is about 2 people. It used to be 3.5. They don't need an SUV. They won't buy an SUV. And you could sell 5 non-SUVs to those people, actually from a market perspective, make more money than the one SUV you're going to sell to one person. And so once again, it all kind of cyclically works together, even if you don't have a harder goal like me. Because it's just market. And I'll give you one quick final
No, I don't
which
want you to give
is,
it. I've got to go, Joel. I got to go.
if I told you there was a way to create 500 units of affordable housing in 1 week, what would you say? Right? I think everybody would be like, tell me more. Pad Split, an organization founded and started in Atlanta, a member of a cohort of mine way back in the day, did that this past week with zero subsidy of money from Sarah Kirsch, from the city of Atlanta, from Invest Atlanta. And so once again, could any of those folks who now have opened up bedrooms have just done an Airbnb or whatever? Maybe, possibly, but clearly this is a better option. And oh, by the way, it provided an option to somebody who now is living at below like 80 and 60% AMI. And once again, 0 units. So I'm letting you know the answer is not just hypothetical and theoretical, it's reality.
All right. Please thank our panelists. Oh, man. I'm going to have to get you guys to try to manage time. We're going to pivot a little bit. This is great information. I'll have a lot of questions on the table. I think some of these guys are going to stick around, or you know how to find them. So follow up with them. We're going to pivot a little bit to a subject we've covered before in the past. And we're going to talk about the dynamic of institutional investors. Now, we know actually it was a year and maybe 2 years ago, we spent a whole session on this. This is investment banks buying up housing in the region. Nationally, they own about 3% of the housing. So it's not a big deal. In Georgia, they own 30% of the housing. It means that gets bought up. They oftentimes overpay. It means individuals don't get to buy their own homes and create their own wealth. So I've asked Taylor Shelton from Georgia State University to come with some data. Taylor, come on up. With the latest data on this, I'm going to give you less time than you had before, Taylor, but thank you for being here. I think this is going to be very interesting. Taylor, thank you.
Thank you, Bill. All right, thank you. Hello, hello, hello. Hi, thanks everybody for being here. Thanks to Bill and to George for the invitation. As Bill said, my name is Taylor Shelton. I'm an associate professor in the Department of Geosciences just down the street at Georgia State. And I have been researching this issue here in Atlanta and across the country really for the last 4 years or so. Before we jump into all of the things that we know about corporate landlords and their effects on the housing market, I do just want to begin with a quick clarification of who exactly we're talking about here today. So when I'm talking about corporate landlords, just know that I am not referring to just any property that is owned by an LLC or an LP or some other kind of corporate form. Instead, I'm referring to what Bill just called institutional investors, though that may be a little bit of a misnomer, which I can talk about later, but also colloquially known as Wall Street landlords. So these are large, highly capitalized firms, mostly based outside of Georgia, though not exclusively. They're a mixture of publicly traded and privately held, but they essentially just pool money from different investors in order to purchase and operate large portfolios of single-family rental housing across the entire United States. And this is a sampling of the major players here in Georgia and nationally. So what do we know about these corporate landlords and the way that they operate? First, and perhaps most importantly, they own an increasing share of housing, of single-family housing across the country, upwards of 500,000 properties nationwide. While some like to dismiss the role of these landlords as saying they own, as Bill already mentioned and set up for me, just 3% of the single-family rental housing across the country, that number is a bit misleading for a couple of reasons. First is the temporal aspect of things. 15 years ago, that number was effectively zero, as none of the companies I just showed you operating in this space even existed at that time. No entity owned 1,000 single-family homes across the entire country 15 years ago. Now we have something like 13 landlords just in Georgia that own over 1,000 single-family rental properties. But even further, that 3% figure assumes that those homes are distributed equally across all places across the country. And we know that not to be true. The first rule of real estate is location, 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 right? And some places are invested in much more heavily than others, which I will come back to in just a moment. Second, we know that these companies like to hide the full scope of their real estate holdings through a series of interlocking limited liability companies, or LLCs, which can make it difficult for tenants, policymakers, or others to track down who exactly owns these properties and hold them accountable. My research here in Atlanta, that was covered heavily just a couple of years ago, found that just the three largest of these companies here in Metro Atlanta used over 190 different unique owner names and over 70 different unique owner addresses in order to disguise the full scope of their property holdings and limit their potential exposure to either legal liability or regulatory scrutiny. And at the same time as these companies' property holdings have been going up, so have the rents on these properties. While the lack of granular data about rents makes it difficult for us to produce kind of systematic, granular findings on just how much these companies are driving rent increases, all anecdotal evidence suggests that these companies are raising rents faster than other kinds of landlords, while also adding on various kinds of junk fees that add on to tenants' financial burdens. And as a result of the rent increasing, more and more of these companies, tenants have fallen behind on rent, and that has led these landlords to become some of the most frequent evictors around at rates that far exceed those of small and medium-sized landlords. Some of you might have seen work from Matthew Desmond's eviction lab at Princeton University that just came out here in the last couple of weeks, showing that Metro Atlanta has more evictions than any other place in the entire country over the last several years, including New York City, despite the fact that New York City has a substantially larger renter population than we do here in Metro Atlanta. And for the tenants that aren't evicted from their homes, they're facing consistently worse living conditions, as seen in the demonstrably higher rate of code enforcement violations that these corporate landlords receive. So in total, at the same time as these companies are growing their imprint on the housing market, the tenants who have the misfortune of renting from them are effectively paying more money for what amounts to a worse product. And finally, we know that in addition to their deleterious effects on the thousands of renter households here in Georgia and elsewhere, these companies have also crowded out countless potential homebuyers, especially younger and first-time homebuyers. According to work by Brian Ahn, just up the street in the other direction at Georgia Tech, this has resulted in over $1 billion of lost home equity just within the city of Atlanta, just between 2011 and 2021, with the majority of this being concentrated in Black households and Black neighborhoods, thereby furthering the racial wealth gap within the city of Atlanta. And it doesn't take too much of a deep dive into headlines here in Metro Atlanta in recent years to see just how broad these trends, or just how these broader trends are reflected in the individual experiences of people who have, again, had the misfortune of renting from these companies. We can see everything in these headlines from erroneous eviction filings that mark tenants' records long after having moved out of their corporate-owned single-family rentals to tenants being forced to live months without heat, air conditioning, or other essential appliances, creating significant hazards to human health and well-being. And so the kicker is that all of this is particularly problematic for us here in Metro Atlanta, as we are the epicenter of corporate investment in single-family rentals nationwide. According to the most recent data that I've analyzed, in the 28 county Metro Atlanta MSA, we are home to more than 78,000 corporate-owned single-family rental properties, which is more than second-ranked Phoenix and third-ranked Dallas combined. These properties represent a full third of the single-family rental market here in Metro Atlanta, a rate roughly 11 times higher than that 3% figure that is the national average currently. Which is an important opportunity for me to come back to this location point to say that housing markets are not national. They are fundamentally local. And any kind of statistical measure at the national level for the housing market is going to be fundamentally misleading because it does not reflect local conditions on the ground. Whether these concentrations are at the scale of the metro area or even down to the scale of the neighborhood, which is arguably even more important and appropriate as a scale of analysis, you end up essentially masking the market power and influence that these companies are able to have. So it's very important. I'm putting my geographer hat on for all of you, right? Geography is very important in how we understand this question. The where and at what scale are we measuring makes a very big difference. And so just to drill down a little bit more at the county level, you can see the concentrations of these corporate landlords here. The size of the circles here represents the total number of single-family rentals they own. The shading represents the share of the single-family rental market those represent. So you can see here that the problem is not totally isolated to Metro Atlanta. We have concentrations outside of Metro Atlanta across the rest of Georgia, but the vast majority of investment is here. There are only about 5,000 corporate-owned single-family rentals outside of the 28 county MSA across the entire rest of the state. But even within the Metro Atlanta area here, effects are felt unevenly. So if you look at some of the more suburban and exurban counties in the metro region, the smaller total number of rental properties in those areas means that these still very large numbers of corporate ownership have allowed them to essentially corner the market in many of these areas. This is especially seen in places like Douglas, Henry, and Paulding counties, where these companies own 58, 70, and 82% of the single-family rental market, respectively. Just to go a little bit further, in Paulding County, these companies own over half of the total rental market. And just to be clear, I'm also talking at the level of individual counties. It's usually just 5 or 6 of these companies, not the 20 or so that I'm analyzing otherwise. But in Paulding County, these companies own over half of the total rental market and more than 10% of all housing units, regardless of building type or housing tenure. So you can see that here in this map, again, zooming in a little bit more to the level of state house districts. I've been using this as I try to convince some of our state legislators to do something about this, which we'll come to in a minute. But there are 18 districts of the 159 state house districts where the corporations own more than half of the single-family rental market, but none more so than Representative Marianne Santos's 117th district down here in Henry County, where these companies own essentially the entirety of the single-family rental market. It's actually kind of funny because the data that we have on actual corporate ownership of single-family housing is developing and moving faster than the census data that we use to calculate market share. The denominator that we use from the census is actually lagging behind corporate ownership. So the rate that you calculate using that data is over 100% because they don't realize that there are even more single-family rentals already than there were just a couple of years ago. And it's worth noting here that really the only exception to the rule of the concentration here in Metro Atlanta is the little donut of our whitest and wealthiest neighborhoods in the northern half of the city of Atlanta and just beyond its borders. But other than that, essentially no corner of Metro Atlanta has gone untouched by these corporate landlords, regardless of whether they're represented by Republicans or Democrats. Whether they are predominantly urban, suburban, or even in some cases downright rural neighborhoods, whether they're working class or more well-to-do, whether they're Black, white, Latino, or Asian. Put simply, the scope of these companies' holdings is unlike anything we have ever seen before, and allowing these companies to continue to amass this kind of market power and market share will ultimately yield nothing but more of the same in terms of those kinds of negative outcomes for tenants and potential home buyers that I was just mentioning. So what can be done about this problem? Perhaps, unfortunately, any real effort on this issue is left to the General Assembly, as state level preemption has largely tied the hands of counties and municipalities on being able to regulate these companies, as many of you are probably well aware. But luckily, the current legislative session has seen over a dozen different proposals targeted directly at regulating corporate landlords, up from just 2 in our previous 2-year session between 2023 and 2024. And while half of these bills have gotten hearings, only a handful have been passed out of committee, with only one relatively minor bill, HB 399, being signed into law during the first year of the session last year. Should be noted that this is a truly bipartisan issue. I think if you had to pick 2 things in the entire country, but also showing up here in Georgia, that everybody can agree on regardless of their politics, one would be data centers and the other is corporate landlords. I think if anything unites everybody, it's those 2 things. So the bills that have been proposed in this session have tended to fall into one of 3 kind of major approaches to regulating corporate landlords. So we can change the way we tax them, we can prohibit them from purchasing homes in the future, or we can cap the levels of ownership and force them to divest from their properties. The bills that I've listed here don't include all of the proposals, but these are the most substantive ones that have been proposed. They're color-coded based on sponsorship. So the purple are bills with both Republican and Democratic co-sponsors. Blue is Democratic only, red is Republican only. And then ones with an asterisk are the ones that have been heard in committee already. And so I'll focus on those here in the remainder of my time. So I was going to talk about HB 305, but I know you'll hear about this in the recorded video with Representative Phil Olaleye, who is the primary sponsor of this bill. So I'm just going to skip over this, but know that this is essentially one of the cap and divest bills. To dive into it a little bit more, one of the other major proposals that we've seen is HB 555, which was introduced by Republican Representative Derek McCollum last year. It passed out of the House Judiciary Committee with near unanimous support, passed out of the Rules Committee, but then was ultimately not brought to the floor of the House for a vote on crossover day. Representative McCollum then subsequently introduced a very slightly changed version of this bill in the form of HB 1115, which has not really been picked up since he introduced it earlier this year in session. But both of these bills share that they cap the number of homes that any corporation could own at 2,000 across the entire state. And then they allow for a private right of action. So essentially individuals being able to sue these companies into compliance based on the damages that individuals would be allowed to receive. The thing that is really interesting and really powerful about this bill, in my estimation, is that if it were passed, it would only affect 8 different companies. That's a pretty narrowly tailored piece of legislation, I think, when you're talking about this. But that 2,000 cap is even more interesting here, because while there are just 8 companies affected, those 8 companies own over 70,000 properties across the entire state. And so capping each of them at owning only 2,000 would mean that these companies would have to dispose of over 55,000 single-family homes across the entire state of Georgia. Unfortunately, this bill hasn't, again, been brought back. HB 555 didn't get brought back up this year, and HB 1115 didn't make any movement, even though it seemed like this was going to be the direction that we might be heading this time last year. Instead, some Republican and Democratic representatives have seemed to shift their focus to the taxation route with HB 1228 and its accompanying resolution, HR 1244. So these proposals would increase the ad valorem tax on corporate-owned single-family rental properties from 40% of fair market value to 100%. These are part of the larger suite of tax proposals that state Republicans have been working on this year, and it's essentially meant as a way to offset the potential loss of tax revenue from owner-occupant property taxes, given that one of the proposals is to increase the homestead exemption to 100% of the tax bill. But because this is changing the state's tax code, it would require a constitutional amendment, which makes things a little bit messy. So we would have to vote on this as a statewide referendum. But the most important thing about this particular proposal is that it comes with some mixed impacts. Taxing corporate landlords opens up a little bit of a Pandora's box. Without some kind of accompanying rent stabilization, it's likely that this additional financial burden on companies would ultimately just be passed on to their tenants, whether in the form of increased rents or more deferred maintenance. Taking a random case that I just pulled a property off of Progress Residential's, the largest operator in the state, off their list of properties for rent currently. I looked up the tax bill. That property would only have to increase its monthly rent by $300 in order to absorb the entirety of that tax increase. And given the kinds of numbers that we've seen across Metro Atlanta in the last 5-10 years, that isn't kind of out of the realm of possibility in terms of what these companies would be able to do, particularly when they own such large shares of the market across large areas of Metro Atlanta. So these proposals were heard in a House subcommittee on ad valorem taxation a few weeks ago, but they've not been voted out of committee at this time. And with crossover day coming up tomorrow, it's likely that these will not move forward at this time. One last bill, though, to talk about is SB 463, which is co-sponsored by 19 Republican state senators, essentially half of the Republican caucus, and which was actually passed by a vote of the full Senate of 49-3 just the other day on Tuesday, I believe. So this will be the bill that we're looking at here for the rest of the session, essentially, with a month to go. SB 463 prohibits companies from owning more than 500 single-family homes. And similarly to HB 555 and 1115, it would allow for a private right of action as the enforcement mechanism, though it allows for substantially higher damages to be awarded. That said, SB 463 allows for an exemption for any build-to-rent properties, which represents the primary means by which these companies are continuing to grow their investments now rather than acquiring existing homes. But the most important problem with this particular bill is that it does not force divestment of any homes over and above that cap as of the day that it goes into effect. So it essentially just prohibits companies from acquiring any more existing single-family rental homes, rather than forcing divestment. And so while each of these would be a step in the right direction of some sort, they each come with their own challenges. So as I was just mentioning, a lot of these companies are no longer acquiring existing homes. They're more focused on build to rent as the way they're growing their portfolios. And so it would be unlikely to have a significant effect on potential home buyers. These companies are already drawing back from that part of the market a little bit. And this would do nothing also to affect the many people renting from them. As I mentioned, changes to the way we tax these properties have very unclear impacts. It's unclear what actually the full monetary value would be coming back in terms of taxes to the state or localities. And it also has this messiness of the constitutional amendment. And so ultimately, I am of the opinion that without forcing divestment of these companies' existing holdings, there is no other way to guarantee a positive impact on the housing market from regulating corporate landlords. Forcing divestment both deconcentrates the rental market. It breaks up the kind of near monopolies that these companies are developing, and also would provide a little bit of a supply shock to help bring prices down in the home buying market. Though, of course, the devil is in the details when it comes to what kind of cap on the total number or the share, at what scale, is it the neighborhood, is it the county, is it the state? And then how do you kind of work out the timeline for divestment, right? Is it all immediate? Is it over a 5-year period, a 10-year period, what have you? So I will wrap up very quickly here, Bill, and just say that while these more narrowly tailored solutions focused only on corporate landlords are important, the number one way that we can discourage these companies is to enact stronger tenant protections across the board for all tenants, not just tenants of corporate single-family rental properties. These companies have largely come to Georgia because the current regulatory environment has allowed them to operate with almost total impunity and have essentially no consequences for all of their bad actions. Policies around rent stabilization, rental registries, more proactive code enforcement, allowing tenants to withhold rent in order to force repairs, making eviction more difficult, and prohibiting junk fees. All of these have been proposed in some form or fashion in this legislative session as well, though with much less fanfare and attention and movement on those bills. And they would all go a very long way towards discouraging this kind of exploitative and extractive development. But without these kinds of policies and protections, Georgia is going to remain ground zero for these predatory corporate investors buying up our communities, and they're going to be ultimately leaving us regular Georgians as the ones holding the bag. So with that, thank you very much. I think we'll hold off on questions.
I'm gonna open it up for any questions. We've got a few in the back. I'm not going to show the video, so I'll give you a minute.
Hi, Taylor. Thanks so much for this presentation. Excuse me, Dr. Shelton.
You can call me Taylor. It's fine.
Hopefully you'll be providing a link to your statewide research for folks in the room as a result of this conversation. But also, more specifically, one of the things that I think is especially challenging for another component of our affordable housing puzzle is regarding subsidy. And folks who administer voucher programs or other types of subsidy know that oftentimes, especially in our current market environment, our institutional investors are the only ones who actually will accept those subsidies. There are all sorts of challenges related to that, right, with rent increases and other deposits that are required. But could you speak a little bit about the consequence to the voucher accepting component of the market if some of these solutions that are presented legislatively are passed?
Yeah, that's a great question. That's not something I've, we don't essentially have access to data on just how many of these properties owned by these companies have tenants using vouchers. But that is something that would be very interesting to know. And yeah, without some kind of also accompanying change in source of income discrimination or something like that, that could be a negative impact of this kind of regulation. But I think you also, in terms of thinking about the overall system and whether essentially government subsidies to corporate landlords ripping off low-income tenants is the best use of those dollars and the way the whole thing works together, right? It does put us in a little bit of a catch-22. But yeah, there are a lot of kind of interlocking things, and wiping out corporate landlords, just to be clear, is not the only thing that we need to do in our housing market. But we are the place that is dealing with this more than anybody. So,
yes.
Hi, I'm Beth
Hey, Beth.
Stevens from Enterprise Community Partners. I just want to thank Dr. Shelton for all this great research and how much, his research supports the advocacy work that's happening at the Capitol on these issues. I did want to ask a question because some of these bills are applicable specifically to real estate investment trusts. And I know that, we're calling these institutional investors. And you mentioned that House Bill 555 only applies to 8 of these different entities. I wonder if you could speak a little bit to the distinction between real estate investment trusts and some of these institutional investors and whether REITs really covers all of them.
Yeah, so a real estate investment trust is essentially just a way of organizing a corporation that holds real estate. So the vast majority of these companies do operate as real estate investment trusts, though there are likely some that have some of these subsidiaries and stuff are not. But they are a mixture of publicly traded real estate investment trusts that you can buy stock in, and then many of them are privately held, where when the true use of institutional investor right would be like the pension or retirement funds who then give money to these landlords who then invested in housing. So those privately held firms are raising capital basically through those more private channels of relationships with institutional investors. But my understanding, as I've read the legislation that's been proposed, is that one, they have a really great clause that I've been asked about repeatedly when I talk about this of like, well, what about all of the LLCs? Does it do that? They largely have that covered through kind of clauses about related entities and subsidiaries and things like that. So that tends to be less of an issue. But I believe generally my read of all these things is that the bills would cover the companies that they need to cover, even if there might be some outliers, but in general, they're capturing the folks we need to.
Taylor, I have a question from online.
Okay.
Stephanie Hudson asked, I heard some of the corporate landlords were selling off many of the properties. Is that true?
Yeah, so there is a little bit of a sell-off happening here in the last year or two.
A little bit?
A little bit. I don't have good up-to-date numbers on it here for the Metro Atlanta area. But one of the important things to say, and I had this out with some lobbyists of corporate landlords in a meeting with legislators a month ago, is that in the same breath that some of these corporate landlord representatives will say, well, we're net sellers right now. We're not the problem anymore. You can't pin this on us. They also say, well, we're also trying to sell properties on the open market to first-time home buyers, but nobody wants them. Nobody can buy these properties. Nobody can qualify for a mortgage, et cetera, et cetera. And so if it isn't individuals buying them, who's buying all of these properties? It's other corporate landlords, right? It is not a net change in the overall kind of corporate ownership share. It's just horse trading between firms that are trying to consolidate portfolios, say, okay, this property doesn't really fit what we're trying to do anymore, but this newer company that has a smaller portfolio right now, they're interested in getting into this neighborhood or whatever. And so those properties are essentially just trading hands between corporate landlords ultimately. But the continued growth of their portfolios does tend to be more in that build to rent market now. So they're, doing partnerships with home builders directly where neighborhood goes up, all of the properties in it are for rent by a single company from day one, essentially.
So one last question, Taylor. And I know you're a source of data for legislators. You've been to the Capitol, they come to you. What kind of questions are they asking you? Because oftentimes the legislature be looking for data that supports their point of view or what they have to protect. So what kind of questions do you get?
Yeah, I get a lot of questions. I think one of the biggest things that we see, particularly in relation to the bipartisan support for regulating corporate landlords, is you start to see some of the divergence of why different constituencies of elected representatives are interested in the issue. Republicans tend to be much more interested in the effects on prospective home buyers, particularly in some of these suburban and exurban counties. They're a little bit less concerned with the effects of like concentrated ownership in the rental market, which is something that the Democrats tend to be a little bit more interested in. And so those kinds of differences reflect kind of the differences in questions I tend to get. But I think one of the biggest things I'll just bring back up is what I mentioned about rents previously, is everybody wants to know just how much these companies have driven up prices in the rental market. And again, the reality is we cannot actually know because we do not have data on actual rental prices, right? The census lags too much. It's based on such a small sample of the population that we cannot use that. And it's not disaggregatable by different types of landlords or anything like that. So the census is essentially useless for understanding how particular landlords or types of landlords impact the housing market. And then municipalities are currently preempted from being able to pass rental registration ordinances or rent stabilization ordinances. The two would go together, most likely. But Cities in the state of Georgia can't do that themselves. They cannot force landlords to provide data on what they're actually charging, and scraping data from sites like Zillow or whatever is not useful because that doesn't reflect actual rents. That only reflects asking rents for units that are being rented to a new tenant, which does not reflect the rapid rise of rents in recent years on lease renewals. So because of that, we can't really say, and that is ultimately a very big problem for being able to intervene effectively in the rental housing market and be able to address the issue of affordability for renters.
Please thank Dr. Taylor Shelton. Thank you, man. Appreciate it. Thank you for joining us, the Housing Forum today. I'm sorry you couldn't be here in person, but I know you're both busy and had other commitments. So thank you. Also, I want to invite you to participate in the future. You can do that online or participate in person. So let me get you introduced. We have Mayor Pro Tem Elton Alexander from Stockbridge, Georgia. And if everybody remembers where Stockbridge is, that's in Henry County. Absolutely. And we're particularly appreciative of you being here because Henry County was the county where we were having the most growth in this kind of housing. So I know a lot's happening there, and it's something you've tried to address. I want to thank you, Representative Olaleye, for taking the charge at the legislature. You know, it's not an easy thing to figure out how the state can support local communities. And it's not easy for the communities to communicate it up to state representatives to say what would be most helpful. So let me start with you, Representative. Oh, and let me just say, at the Housing Forum, we're very informal. So if you're okay with me addressing you as Elton, as the Mayor Pro Tem, and Phil as our representative, if you're okay with that, we'll go with that.
Yes, sir.
Okay, Phil, let me begin with you. The state's always, I think, listening to local communities and trying to figure out at a state level how we could be most helpful. When we look at this kind of housing, we see that it only owns about 2.5% of this kind of housing across the country. But in Georgia, it's 30%. And we're one of the biggest states that have had this kind of investment. So it's high time the state to say, what is our policy going to be? So I know you have brought forth legislation, and there's been several legislations that have been brought forth at the legislature in the last 2 years. Phil, let me ask you at the state, I know the state's always listening to local municipalities and communities and how could the state help? We know that this kind of investment around the country represents about 2% of housing, but in Georgia, it's 30%. So we're one of the biggest states for out-of-state investors. And it's really called a ripple effect across the state. I know you've represented Bill 1252, and I know House Bill 205 has gotten a lot of interest. Tell us about that bill and how you think it would help.
Well, first off, thank you, Bill, for pulling us together to have this important conversation. So much of my job as a state representative, and I serve parts of Atlanta and a little bit of East Point, it's getting on the ground and being able to connect with local leaders, community stakeholders, and neighbors to make sure that my finger's on the pulse of what's happening, good, bad, and indifferent. And in this case, we've seen a large increasing presence of these out-of-state corporations, Wall Street firms, investment funds that are dominating our local housing market, particularly in our single-family housing market. And you have to ask yourself why. You mentioned earlier that those types of investments only represent roughly 2 to 3% of activity in the housing market across the country. But here in Georgia, it's a fourth and almost a third of all of our single family homes are being acquired by these large corporate entities. And what does that mean to the prospective home buyer? Well, it means that you have less homes available for purchase. What does that mean for the community member whose community and city is being increasingly influenced by these out-of-state actors? Well, it means that your rents are typically going up more than normal. It means that eviction filings are typically increasing more than normal, as well as concerns and issues that are being raised by those tenants. And so House Bill 305, I'll start with that one, Bill, would put some common sense guardrails in place and limit the amount of homes that these large institutional investors can own in a specific county at 25 homes or a net value of all assets in their portfolio at about a little north of $6 million. And so again, we're not trying to hurt or place undue injury on our mom and pop investors who serve a purpose in our communities to take underutilized, unused, or dilapidated properties and make those homes livable for families. But these larger entities that can move at speed that no individual can compete with are typically purchasing these homes in bulk, which has a negative impact on artificially inflating our home values. I don't think it's crazy or surprising to think that you or I can compete with a billion-dollar corporation. And so that's a bill that got a hearing last session, and we're continuing to push that forward this session. And then the second bill you referenced 1252, would provide an individual with a right of first refusal for a 30-day window once a home is made open for sale and that listing hits the market. An individual like you or I, a nurse, an educator, a law enforcement official, you name it, would have the first right to place an offer. And if that offer is matched within that 30-day window, they would be able to step into home ownership. So again, providing more balance and competition for the individual and resting some of that outsized influence that these larger corporate investors have in our housing market.
Well, it's a real balancing act. I don't think any of us are against building more affordable housing. I mean, we're so far behind. This is one way to do it. And I don't think any of us are against capitalism. We want investment dollars to go where they do the best good. But we also, as you stated, it has negative effects in local communities like Stockbridge or any communities around the state. Tell us what the conversation is when you're sitting in committee. I mean, that tension between we want capitalism to work and we need to build more affordable housing. Do we want to protect our local communities?
It is a balancing act, and we want to be pro competition and pro free market. But I know the mayor pro tem can speak to this more intimately. There is no competition when one whole investor or small consortium of investors own 99% of the single family rental market. That we have thrown competition effectively out of the window at that point. And because these institutions have a lot of capital on their balance sheets, they cannot operate like normal individuals or mom and pop investors. When I purchased a home in my neighborhood in Summerhill, I interacted and interfaced with parents with a kid, and I was able to discuss my wife and I at the time our dream of owning a home and stepping into all of the benefits that a home provides, taking some roots into the community, being a part of that community, going to church, our children going to those local schools. And we were able to own a home, unlike many of these large institutional investors that have no presence here in Georgia. And so you're simply a figure on a balance sheet. And it's difficult because, to your point, there is a purpose to be served in terms of being able to utilize and leverage that capital to turn homes into livable assets for that local community and for those local individuals looking to step into home ownership. But if they're sitting on, I mean, Bill, there are 6 or 7 of these large institutional investors that own north of 50,000 homes.
Yeah.
50,000 in the hands of 6 or 7 institutional investors. I don't know how that serves the people of Georgia or how that serves those communities when we're creating whole rental zones and revolving doors within neighborhoods. And that rubs against the fabric of a community that you want to be able to look across the street and depend on your neighbor. But if that neighbor is in and out of the home because they cannot afford to keep up with the continuous hikes and jumps in rent, that disrupts a lot of things on the ground that, again, we want to be able to lead with common sense and find some common ground to put some guardrails in place to eliminate that outsized impact that these large investors have on our local housing markets.
Let me turn to Mayor Pro Tem Alexander. Elton, you've heard how the state is trying through different bills to help local communities. As we know, Henry County has been the target for development. And I think for a long time we could brag about Henry County and all the good things that were happening there. At a certain point, when you have institutional investors buying up all the housing, it may not be that helpful. You know, one of the things in local communities we know is that people stay in these rental housings about 2.2 years. So they're moving on. It is almost impossible to plan for schools and roads and rec centers. How do you plan a community when there's that much movement? So I know you were involved in setting a rental-oriented moratorium on housing. How has that gone? And what kind of feedback have you gotten from your local community?
Well, first of all, thank you for including me in this panel. This is an extremely important issue that we see on the ground in Stockbridge. Originally in 2020, we had a developer come before us for a single family neighborhood. And certainly we were happy to see that happen, single family detached. And then that developer proceeded to have the builder sell 4 homes in that neighborhood and then turn around and then sell the rest of the homes to a rental community. Certainly, we heard major concern for the homeowners in the neighborhood, and it was certainly something we had never seen before. So after that, subsequent to that, we implemented a moratorium on housing at that point, where we looked at it from the legal side. And subsequent to that, we developed what we considered the template for moving forward, which was we established an owner occupancy clause in every single family development that would require a rental percentage to be established. That where we had 90% owner occupancy would be required, because of course, certainly, and let me say this before we get started, all renters aren't bad, and we certainly appreciate the need for having renters in the neighborhood, but we want to maintain a balance, because if you make that investment in your community, you understand you want to be in a community that is reinforced by home ownership, because we know home ownership has investment and then sweat equity involved as well. And from my professional side as a realtor, I have seen the cost of this, especially during the pandemic when homes were selling extremely fast. You would have a single individual who was bidding on a contract for a particular home, and then they were bidding against someone who was bidding 100% cash that could close within 7 to 14 days. And we know how that went repeatedly, where homeowners were outbid or they were not selected, and had people searching for homes, bidding on 10 to 12 homes to just get an opportunity at putting a contract on a home. So what we saw after that, the moratorium, and then indeed the owner occupancy clause, we've developed that strategy to make sure that we kept the community whole. And as Stockbridge implemented that, Henry County followed that template in a countywide action where now they require the owner occupancy clause in every single family development too, because it's all about balance. And certainly, Representative Phil, we certainly appreciate your action under the Gold Dome, because this is so much bigger than the local community. And at times we feel totally overwhelmed, as I'm sure you hear from your constituency, about these actions taking place, and to understand growth is coming to our area, and then we see what particular growth is coming and what do we want to see as our communities start to build out, especially 8 to 10 of the census tracts are in Henry County. And I can speak from this personally. My own neighborhood was preyed upon, I'll say, and use those words, where we were basically 50% of the homes now, or close to 50% of the homes now, are investor owned. And you can't
Wow.
blame the homeowner at this time, because people were cashing in at that time, and home values were extremely high, and they were taking advantage of that at the time.
Phil, you just got a shout out from the Mayor Pro Tem. Are you getting many of those? Thank you for putting this legislation forward.
There's been a chorus of residents, constituents, not just in my district, but across the state, who recognize that we have very few solutions, and have had very few responses to this growing trend of corporate acquired homes, single family homes. And we've got to do something about it. I literally, in a few hours, will be presenting to the Rural Development Committee a study committee that would give us time in the off season to bring everyone to the table, bring the realtors, bring local government, our community leaders, prospective home buyers, developers, you name it, to the table, so that we can dig deeper into what we're seeing in terms of the acquisition of these single family homes. What are the real benefits? What are some of the real costs and impacts? And that we can be thoughtful in terms of some of the solutions and recommendations that are being brought to the table going into next session, because this is not a Democrat or Republican specific issue. It's a Georgia issue. And although Metro Atlanta seems to be ground zero for this corporate investment presence in our single family housing market, we're seeing those acquisition trend lines begin to bleed out into the exurbs in
Well,
rural parts
let
of
me
town.
ask, why is it so hard to get off committee? I mean, we've been grappling with this for 2 years. Elton, do you need to get down to the Capitol more? And what do you need to get us across the finish line here?
Well, that's one part. I do believe that conversations like this bring real legislative solutions to the forefront and minds of our community leaders, such as the Mayor Pro Tem, to bring their voice and their advocacy to the table to make sure that these ideas are being pushed along the legislative process. But to your earlier point, and I know the Mayor Pro Tem made a great point in terms of it's a balancing act, right? And we literally have the most corporate investment activity in the housing market of any other state. And so oftentimes people ask me, well, what are some like or comparable legislation that other states have led with that we can learn from? This is a fairly new phenomenon. This is fairly new activity. I would say pre and post pandemic. And so we're just now beginning to wrap our hands around it, but the speed at which these actors are moving, it's shocking and awing many folks on the ground, to the point where you look up and 20, 30, 50, and in some cases 99% of the entire single family rental market is owned and run by these out-of-state corporations. And I don't see how that benefits the community, having a revolving door of renters. And again, there are folks who want to rent, and that's perfectly
No,
fine.
we're not
We want to
against renters,
support that.
and we're not
But I
against
don't,
investment.
but I don't think 80, 90,000 homes and growing, it's a good thing. I don't believe it's sustainable. And so we've got to confront the reality and wrestle this issue to the ground and put some commonplace actions in place that can protect not only homeowners, legacy residents, renters, but also prospective homeowners. Every single house that's in the hand of a corporate investor is one less home that could be a part of our housing supply for an individual to purchase and build wealth and stability for their family. And so that's the goal, that's the aim, and it's going to take conversations like this and real policies and solutions in order to deliver for the state.
Let me
We're
just
going to
say
keep this conversation going.
as
Mayor Pro
as
Tem.
we go along as well, in terms of to add to that particular conversation, was, it's good to hear some noise coming out of DC as well. And certainly Reverend Senator Warnock has introduced the bill in the past couple of years, as long as Senator Ossoff. And even, lately President Trump has been talking about that effect as well. Certainly, we want to see some action in, Henry County was just down at the Gold Dome a few weeks ago where we had a Henry County Day down there. At every opportunity, we try to take advantage of this. I remember at National League of Cities in 2023, 2024, I went up to Housing Secretary Marsha Fudge and I said, we got to do something in Metro Atlanta. There's something going on that we need to tackle and that we need to deal with at that point to see whether or not we could get some legislation done. And she said they were coming to a housing forum in Atlanta, probably yours at the time, to see what could be done. But certainly not just on a state level, on a national level, this problem is countrywide, it's nationwide, that something has to be done on all levels, starting at the federal level and here at the state. Maybe we could pioneer, or we would be the first out the box to do something substantial. But certainly, as we've done on the local level with the owner occupancy clause, that has been key and that has held up so far, that we've been able to do that. And it certainly has slowed things a bit, but the homeowners out here need help. They need help in growing the pot, and we need to do something substantial in order to increase the inventory of available homes. And as was stated by Representative Phil, is that every home that is owned by the corporation just exacerbates the shortage of homes. And that's something that we certainly need to deal with on the supply side, is the shortage of homes is being exacerbated by this particular issue.
I told you this time we go very quickly, so we're about to run out of time. I think Elton, Phil says you need to have a Henry County Day every 2 weeks. He's down there beating on his door. Let me just ask on the local level, do you feel like you have the tools to respond? I know ARC has a huge affordable housing initiative now working all over the region, but I know the state's trying to help. Do you feel like you have the tools to address it at the local level?
Certainly, as I've looked at the bills that have been proposed by Representative Phil and others, I certainly see hope that more tools are coming. Because right now we're simply overwhelmed at the local level with this call, because Georgia, as we know, is a property rights state. And Georgia being a property rights state, it very much limits what we can do on the local level to be able to deal with this problem. It has to be dealt with at the Capitol, and hopefully legislation will be coming our way soon to throw us a lifeline, because right now we're bobbing out here and it's tough.
It's a great metaphor. Phil, I'll give you the last word. What can any of us, there's probably 400 people listening in today to the housing, and then it's recorded, people listen later. We're going to keep coming back to this issue. But what can we do, those who work in and care about this issue, to be supportive of you and answers at the state level?
Well, I would point out that every single elected official in the House and Senate and our statewide constitutional officers are on the ballot this spring and fall. And so there's no more powerful weapon than your voice. And we are responsive to the needs and interests of the communities we serve. And so this is a time to use your voice, to use the power of the stories and experiences that you've felt and seen firsthand, and how this corporate investment activity is hurting your community. We've gotta bring this issue to the forefront of our housing conversation. It's not going to solve the housing issue on its own, but it's an important piece of the puzzle as we work to increase supply and protect the interests of our homeowners, our renters, and our communities. So we need you.
Thank you. And let me thank both of you for joining us today. Again, I'm sorry you couldn't be here in person, but you've had a very important voice for us. You can count on the Housing Forum to keep this front and center. We're working closely with ARC, Elton, in the efforts that they're working with. So let's keep pushing forward. Thank you, gentlemen. And thank you for really taking a stand. It's not an easy issue.
No.
And it really is a tension that we have to live with. So I particularly appreciate policymakers who have to stand in the breach and try to bring some sense to the environment that we're in today.
We
Thank
certainly
you.
appreciate the housing
To
form.
the seat that you're sitting in. You may have been educated for it. You may be like Joel and EJ, you were called to the work. But whatever brought you here, it's good to reflect. Who were your mentors? Who were your teachers? What was the call? Because you've asked a big question. Why can't we have safe, affordable housing for everyone? We also ask, what sustains us in the work? This conversation here has been going on for 40 years. I'm sustained by the fact that you show up, that people still answer when we call, the panelists still come, sometimes to answer difficult questions. But we have to ask ourselves what sustains us, because I'm afraid it's going to get harder. Things are not aligned right now. And the last question is, how are you taking care of yourself? I'm looking at a developer here that's been developing. How long have you been doing this? 40 years? Now, you've had some great projects and some that think I need to get out of this work. But we have to think what sustains us, what feeds us. And there's something because you keep coming back. So man's inhumanity, man, is not new. It's been throughout our history. And ultimately what we need is a change of consciousness. But the way we get a change of consciousness is by being in relationship, by learning what EJ said, we got to learn to trust each other. So I want to challenge each of you before we meet next time, and I may even call on a few of you. I want you to go talk to somebody that has a different point of view, that's afraid to have any density in their neighborhood, that's afraid to use public dollars to help people have decent housing. They came to that view somehow. And until we understand how they came to that view and what sustains them, we're not going to build the trust that's necessary to move this movement forward. To take stock, figure out what sustains you, figure out how to take care of yourself. And I think most importantly, stay together as a community. God bless you all for staying here to the end. Thank you for welcoming me back.